Hello,
Hello?
hello.
Hey, what's up?
Hey, can you hear me? Do I sound okay?
Yep, you sound okay, loud and clear. Um,
Awesome.
just letting you know, I'm live. Would you like to introduce yourself and what we were talking, or what you want to talk about today, so that people know who you are and what the conversation is going to go over?
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Alex. I am a anti-money laundering specialist. It's kind of a fancy title for what I do, but I got a BS in accounting from a state university, and then a little bit after that, I entered into a anti-money laundering analyst role for a Fortune 100 company,
Mm-hmm.
performing investigations to assess whether or not transactions were suspicious,
Mm-hmm.
and if they were, we reported through the suspicious activity report um, that you would file with FinCEN. If they were not, then we would kind of write up an internal memo explaining why not.
Mm-hmm.
I did that for a few years, but then have since moved on to a different role at a different financial institution where I essentially build up the program that I was formerly conducting investigations under, trying to improve the quality of their investigations.
Gotcha.
And so today I wanted to talk to you about essentially the New York Times article, the uh, allegations kind of tax fraud. Um,
Yeah.
and then if we want to, we can talk about the FinCEN Files article that BuzzFeed News recently reported on and kind of some of the stuff surrounding that.
Okay. Real quick, I'm just curious as a question. When you report like a financial crime like this, is this reported to like the FBI, or are you allowed to disclose like what the reporting agency is that you go through? Is this the IRS or?
Sure, yeah. So any report done through the suspicious activity report
Mm-hmm.
is basically housed in a database held by FinCEN, uh, which is basically the arm of the Treasury Department that just handles all financial crimes. But they're pretty small. I think they're like 300 employees.
Okay.
So their database is accessible by pretty much every law enforcement agency out there. Um, so anywhere from like local PDs to FBI, anyone in the DOJ basically can access these SARs and
Mm-hmm.
then act upon them according to what they glean from them. The interesting thing about this database is that there's millions and millions of SARs by now, and I think a lot of people who file these SARs, they
Mm-hmm.
feel like they go into this black hole and there isn't enough resources dedicated to actually investigating the crimes that are being reported on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just because, well, a lot of it is also just like cover your ass sort of stuff that the banks are doing. So compliance is generally just like, hey, we want to mitigate risk. We don't want to get fined by the OCC, so we're going to file a SAR, even if we don't know for sure that this transaction is suspicious.
Mm-hmm.
We're still going to file on it just to cover our ass so that we're not liable should it actually be money laundering.
Gotcha.
If
And I'm
that
sorry,
makes
real
sense.
quick, because you're using this abbreviation. So when you say SAR, you're talking about a suspicious activity report related to some financial transaction, yeah?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, gotcha. Um, okay, cool. Yeah, you briefly you mentioned the understaffing at FinCEN. It kind of sounds a lot like the understaffing at the IRS. I don't know if these two things are at all tied to
Yeah.
one another, but
Actually, I wanted to talk a lot about that today because um, so I saw that you were watching part of the Legal Eagle video, and I think he does a good job of essentially explaining the illegality portion of what Trump is doing. But
mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people then are left with the question of, well, if what he's doing is illegal, why hasn't he been caught for it? Why hasn't he been taken to trial for it, essentially?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer to that is that the IRS has been criminally underfunded.
Understaffed, yeah.
And yeah, exactly. It's been a bipartisan effort in the past few decades in Congress to attack the IRS.
Mm-hmm.
And ProPublica has a series of articles that detail why this is.
Mm-hmm.
They do some good reporting on the IRS, but it goes back to, I mean, even in the 90s, there was a there was some I don't know exactly how it came out, but it apparently the IRS was accused of overstepping in a particular investigation where they like raided a family's home, and there was like a teenage sleepover at it, and they like
Hmm.
were like really mean to the kids. It was just a bunch of bullshit that essentially led to a 1998 IRS reform bill.
Hmm.
And in that bill, uh, it kind of curbed a lot of the IRS's power, so to speak, in that they could no longer assess IRS employees based on how much tax money they brought in,
Hmm.
because they were saying that the IRS was essentially overstepping and like trying to be these Texas Rangers type figures, and going way beyond the scope of what they should be.
Hmm.
And so the that combined with some of the other stuff we've seen in the past couple decades
Hmm.
has prevented the IRS from being able to effectively go after these huge cases of tax fraud.
Yeah.
I think an example of this is that there were a bunch of people that were non-filers. I think this was in 2018,
Hmm.
and they didn't even have resources to go after them, like
Yeah.
some of the easiest potential audits.
Yeah, my understanding is that the IRS has like just knows where there are like hundreds of millions, if not I think billions, maybe even tens of billions of like outstanding like tax receipts. They just can't go after any of it because they just don't have the manpower to do so. And then there's also very strange mandates around like IRS auditing. So for instance, one thing that I believe is true that I'm aware of is when we brought in the EITC, the Earned Income Tax Credit, I believe there's like a mandatory percentage of those that I think the IRS has to follow through on. And like these are people that
Yep.
earn like less than like 30,000, 40,000 a year. And the IRS has to fucking audit the taxes of some of these people, which is a huge fucking waste of money and time.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure poor
Yeah,
people get
and it
audited
leads
in
to
similar
this.
percentages as like incredibly wealthy people because of that Earned Income Tax Credit provision. Yeah.
Yep. It leads to this huge disproportionate enforcement.
Hmm.
And there was a task force that was assembled, I think it was 2012, some in the 2010s, that was supposed to go after like huge tax evaders. And they had developed a case against this billionaire. I think he was originally a German, but he had this mechanics operation here in the U.S. And the whole thing dragged out for years, and eventually, because of the lawyers of that guy fighting the IRS all along the way,
Hmm.
um, the result was that the higher ups in the IRS ended up just shutting it down.
Yeah.
Um, and I think part of that is that they don't want the public to have an adversarial opinion of them, because I think for them, a lot of their work
Hmm.
can be easily solved in a non-adversarial way,
Yeah.
where they just reach out to people and say, hey, we found this discrepancy, can you fix it?
Hmm.
And they don't want everyone having to lawyer up right away out of fear of criminal prosecution.
Yeah.
But then that leads to people like Trump getting away with pretty blatant tax fraud.
Hmm.
And I think the history of his family, Mary Trump kind of goes into it in her book, Too Much and Never Enough, that came out somewhat recently.
Yeah.
But it's kind of the MO of the Trump family to do the things that are detailed in that article.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, it seems like
so,
yeah, the it's so hard with the IRS because I don't know if there's political will on either side. Like, does anybody really want
yep,
to increase funding to the IRS? Like, basically everybody hates
right.
the IRS, but then on the other hand, we complain that we don't have money to fund any of our social programs. I read,
Yeah, it's super unpopular
yeah,
to fund the IRS.
I read, I wouldn't encourage anybody to do this, but I read that it's entirely possible that where we're at right now, it might be like a net positive, like thing for you to just continue to like misreport or not file your taxes correctly over and over and over again, because there's just the
Exactly. Yep.
chances, yeah, especially someone like in like a decent income range, like if you're making between like 100K to like 2 or 5 million a year or whatever, like if you're like in these, like you're making a lot of money but not like up like billions or whatever, that like you can just misreport the
Yeah.
fuck out of everything because they just don't have the resources to go after everybody. You're probably just going to slide by okay, which is scary because that's like a teeter. That's like if you fall off the cliff on that one, like you can lose so much revenue just like instantly when everybody starts to figure that out. It's like a domino. Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
Hmm.
It's essentially, if your business is sufficiently complex, it is more advantageous for you to commit some sort of tax fraud, than to be,
yeah.
yeah.
Than that to be a compliant.
And I think yep, I think we see that with a lot of these offshore accounts and the way that a lot of businesses are now structured. The I think one of the main enforcement portions of the IRS is dedicated just to small businesses, and
Mm-hmm.
that's because they can churn out these audits at a decent pace when the business is not like super complex and doesn't have a bunch of shell companies associated with it.
Yeah.
So it kind of sucks. It's just really like, as a policy, like we should just be giving the IRS as much money as they can take, essentially, to run free with these investigations. But that's
Yeah,
not.
especially because it's
Uh,
like one of the few. This is like a government branch that like, or a government entity. I don't know what you call the IRS, but they generate revenue for the government. Like for every dollar you give
yep.
the IRS, you get like a pretty big multiplier in terms of dollars returned. Like we can just throw money at the IRS and get more money back out of them. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. It's part of one of the things that kind of makes me question a little bit about democracy, of like whether or not it is viable to have a democratic system where in which people can be totally convinced of things that are are
Anti their
not.
own interest. Not even just like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
not even convinced of the wrong thing, but convinced of like the exact opposite. That you'll have like these. That was always one of the fascinating things to me about like Trump and things related to him, is you've convinced like a bunch of like rural, like redneck 25 to 40K a year earners that this billionaire guy has their best interests at heart, while he's like slashing taxes for these massive companies and giving all the, and it's like this guy, yeah, that's always been crazy to me.
Yeah. The ability to conduct propaganda and use the internet and social media to completely pull the wool over the eyes of the public is detriment to
Mm-hmm.
democracy. But in addition to like the IRS's underfunding, there was so the IRS does have a team that is supposed to audit the president every year.
Really?
Previously, like Obama's, yeah. A there's actually some reporting on this. There is a team dedicated to auditing the president every year. But for example, Obama's tax return, I think, was 38 pages long.
Mm-hmm.
And comparing that to Trump's like 500 companies, like you're talking, huge levels of difference here.
Yeah.
And then there was ultimately it is under the Treasury Department, and Steve Mnuchin does have some control there. And there was an IRS whistleblower that came out and said an appointee to the Treasury interfered with the auditing of Trump's taxes. So
Mm-hmm.
that, along with like the whole DOJ internal memo saying they would not indict or bring charges against a sitting president, there could be something similar on the IRS side. And so all that combined is probably what is leading to Trump getting away with it for now.
Well, because my question is, so I haven't gotten to I've only heard things about this, so I don't know. I don't have a total in-depth understanding yet. We were trying to read through this article, and I get distracted like a motherfucker. How is it that this there's like this almost $80 million capital gains loss that he carried forward into his personal income? My understanding is that this has been like up for debate for like 2 decades almost.
10 years.
Oh, is it 10 years? Okay, I thought this was from like the early 2000s. How? Like, why does it take so long to debate over this particular thing?
Yeah, I think it's a failure of the court system, but
Mm-hmm.
also probably a failure on the IRS's part, in that I think what the IRS tries to do initially is approach most people non-adversarially. So
Mm-hmm.
they'll like try to work with their lawyers, and there's this like whole long drawn out process of like back and forth until the IRS finally figures out, hey, these guys are fucking with us. They're not going to actually give us the information we need.
Mm-hmm.
We need to take it to the courts. And so that alone can take years. And then once it gets to the courts, there's all sorts of different ways that things can be delayed. And I'm sure as soon as he became president, things kind of halted there.
Mm-hmm. Huh. Okay. Well, do you want to? Yeah, I guess so. What more specifically, I guess, do you want to chat about?
Oh, sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the what I was going to additionally add to the whole issue with him being a tax fraud
Mm-hmm.
is that his financial obligations and the money come due presents a pretty large, I think, national security threat to the country. We know that, he does have various assets in different forms, but we don't really know the value of those assets and how much of those have been purchased with loans that loans like from Deutsche Bank and others that are. I think it was reported that he has coming due
Like around
420 million.
around 427 million or something, and loans coming due.
Yeah, just personally. And so we know that to him, every sort of business deal, foreign or domestic, is pretty important to him. And I think we see in his mindset, he's very transactional in every approach, and that he tries to charge NATO countries with increasing their funding to everything he sees through just this monetary lens. And we know he has direct ties with building projects in Turkey, Russia, Saudi Arabia, basically. And I think if you view foreign policy through that lens, you can essentially see and pick up on how he's going to act. We can see this currently with the situation between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Have you heard anything about that?
I have absolutely followed nothing in relation to this so far, but go ahead.
Yeah, sure. My wife is Armenian, so I'm pretty high up or caught up on it. But so to give her a little background, in 2018, Armenia had a revolution, or like huge protests that led to the current president stepping down, and then this new president coming into power. And the new president is very liberal in the classical sense. He's very pro-democracy. I think he was a reporter for a while, and just generally like a positive leader if you like Western democracy. Azerbaijan, on the other hand, they have a president, but the election was very suspicious, and he's very much authoritarian. And Azerbaijan and Turkey are very close diplomatically. And so now there's this contested region between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and because Russia is in a treaty with Armenia to defend them, so they should be stepping in militarily. But because Turkey and Russia are currently trying to ease their own tensions and strengthen their alliance, Russia right now is kind of taking a back seat and not being as involved as it should be. So this would be, in theory, like a perfect way for America to get involved and say, hey, look, this is a pro democracy president in a country really close to Russia. They are not a member of NATO, they're not a member of EU, but by helping them, maybe we could get them to consider joining one of those, and maybe like we could strengthen overall liberal democracy in the world. But because of Trump's business ties with Turkey, he had a building project in Azerbaijan, but that got shut down. And then Russia, like, he's probably not acting. And so it presents this huge national security, or peace for the world issue that I don't think most people are picking up on.
Yeah. So to be fair, we don't necessarily know if these are the things that are motivating Trump's decisions, but there is definitely a conflict of interest where leverage can be seen. Somebody could intervene.
Exactly.
Yeah. We never really want. Ironically enough, I guess this is kind of why the president of the United States needs to be a natural-born citizen. It's because we don't want to ever have to worry that the president might have an allegiance to a foreign country that would impede their ability to make a decision, in times of war or something. So the fact that a president might have to make a decision that could cause great personal financial harm and great harm to his family financially is not a good spot to be in, which is why we usually want the president to divest his business interests or whatever.
Yep. I was about to say that his failure to divest has created, even if it's not real, there's a perceived potential that he would, because of his business interests, not act towards the benefit of the country overall.
Yeah. And even the perception of that could be enough to be damaging, even if the reality isn't true. Although I guess, funnily enough, with Trump, I don't even know if divestment would matter since his own family is so personally involved with all the operations and everything. Yeah. Even if he did divest completely, we've got Trump Jr., we've got Kushner and everybody with their hands in so much that it would require a family divestment almost.
Yeah. the close family ties and him bringing on Ivanka and Jared into his inner circle there at the White House are so inappropriate and so beyond like what should be normal.
Yeah.
There's just so many other problems that that come up day by day that it's hard to even remember that these are huge national security threats.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can tell you a little bit more about the FinCEN files and stuff like that. That stuff might be a little bit relevant because it's an example of some popular left-wing figures kind of missing the mark in their messaging.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, sure. So the BuzzFeed News got a hold of, I think it was 1,000 or 2,000 SARs, and I don't know how exactly they were leaked or how that happened, but they then kind of put up this report on them saying that, hey, all these banks are reporting on suspicious transactions and are essentially facilitating money laundering. And then kind of from that, we see some statements from Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, who, I generally like, but, they tend to miss the mark on certain things. But they come out and say, hey, this is a travesty, or this is horrible, like these banks must be held accountable. And to be clear, there are certainly times when large banks like Deutsche Bank, HSBC, and others will actively facilitate money laundering of criminals. However, a lot of these transactions that we see are not being touched or seen from anyone at like any high level in the bank. They're all automated. And so if we want to have and allow this financial network that allows for us to make purchases as quickly as we do, there are some concessions we have to have. And along with that comes the potential that a business or a financial institution will at some point house money that has been illegally obtained. The difference here is that there has to be transaction monitoring through automated rules. An example of that is like if someone wants to deposit over $10,000 in cash, they have to file a currency transaction report. So the way they try to get around that is called structuring, where they will deposit it in increments over a short period of time. And so then there are rules established to try to track that and make sure that that's not happening. Another way that we see alerts is through referral. So if the DOJ subpoenas a customer, it's on us to then go into that customer's account and see, hey, is there anything suspicious here that we should be reporting to FinCEN? So essentially the banks, we are reporting it for the most part, with a few exceptions. I know that at Deutsche Bank, a SAR that was filed, I think it was on Trump, was blocked at the higher levels. And I think if I ever saw that, like, I think I would quit on the job. It's just like, it's insane to me that anyone at a very high level would have oversight of what should be done freely, essentially, what should be reported on by people who are at the analyst level. But anyway, it's a little bit tangential. But so oftentimes the DOJ will even ask the bank not to close the account. So at the bank I used to work at, if we saw enough egregious activity, we would eventually just terminate the account. And so if we knew we had received a subpoena from an agency, we would first reach out to that agency and say, hey, we were going to close this account. Do you want us to hold it open for your investigation? And occasionally they would say, yeah, please don't close it yet. We need to see this continue on, and then once we're done with our investigation, you can close it. So the reporting around it all kind of made it out to look like a lot worse than it is, and that doesn't. And so I just wanted to give a more accurate picture for people if they were interested in hearing that.
Gotcha. Well.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to share with us? Fuck, I don't really know. I don't have a lot of strong opinions in this area, so.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to share kind of some background information on it all and offer that. So I don't have anything else, but if you have any questions, let me know and I can answer them.
How are you so confident? Couldn't we spin up some theoretical or hypothetical reasons why Trump, transferred his carry forward the way that he did, or some ways, like, we don't necessarily know that he 100% committed tax fraud, right? I'm just curious because the statements he made earlier were pretty...
Sure. There, of course, yeah, there's a modicum of doubt available. However, I think the reporting in it was pretty good in that, like, so for example, the consulting payment to Ivanka. So if it were a coincidence, like the amounts just happen to line up, then yeah, sure, like, and it not be the consulting fees that she's reporting on her taxes, then sure. But if it is her that's actually doing the consulting, we know from the Trump website, we know from her job description, everything, that her consulting on a business deal is in the normal purview of her job. Like, there's no reasonable way that anyone could explain away using her as an outside consultant in that deal. The same with the Seven Springs estate that they reported on, is that they have time and again referred to this property as their personal retreat, their home away from home. And to then label it as an investment property flies in the face of that. So they've been blatant enough in their own public public statements, websites, everything, to show that you could not legitimately claim these things are what you are pretending them to be.
Do you think it's strange that we haven't seen this stuff leaked? Here's something that I don't understand. How has this not been leaked from the IRS yet? How many people do you think have eyes on these types of tax documents?
I don't think many, and I think a lot of IRS employees take their jobs very seriously. I think they're very, like, institutional minded, and so it's also like a very serious crime for any IRS employee to leak a tax return. So I think it's been bred into them.
Gotcha.
From like the moment they've started, that revealing these things or leaking these things would get you in a shit ton of trouble. So they, I think that's possibly why. I think it could be just that the New York Times has been accumulating these over the years, and so now they finally have enough information to bring this story forward. So those are a few explanations, I think.
Okay, gotcha. Cool. Okay. Well, have you, in terms of talking about any of this thing, is there anything, I don't know how much you watch my stuff, have I made comments or things related to, like, taxes or money laundering or fraud or whatever that have been, like, totally wrong that you think you can shed light on? Or?
Yeah, no. Everything I've heard from you seems like it's been good. The only thing I might disagree with you on are related to buybacks. I understand everything you've said about buybacks has been for the most part pretty good. I just think that when the Fed is bailing out a company, so I have pretty strong opinions about the Federal Reserve. I'm not a libertarian or anything like that, but so when the Fed is, like, using what is essentially taxpayer funds to purchase corporate bonds or stuff like that, and then those corporations are able to then turn around and issue buybacks, it stretches my reasonable belief that the company could not find anything else to invest that money in or any other way to appropriate those funds, and that perhaps they just they should not be issuing buybacks at a time when they might be financially vulnerable.
Yeah, I don't think I necessarily disagree with that. My issue then wouldn't be the buybacks or dividends. My issue would be giving money to a company that just uses it to increase shareholder value, when that's probably not what we want to do in terms of so, like, for instance, the PPP loans. I thought the concept behind those was good, that you get a loan and it's 100% forgivable if you're paying it towards, like, employee compensation, because it's like, oh, fuck it, well, I might as well hold on to these employees then, because the government's literally paying for it. So yeah, fuck it. Like, I think that type of investment is probably pretty good.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the PPP program was pretty smart. It definitely had its flaws, and some people were able to take advantage of that. I know hedge funds largely were. I wasn't referring to you. I know you.
No, I did 100%. I did. But I also, to be fair, I also kept on one employee for 3 months longer than I would have anyway. He wasn't doing much for me. It was like, fuck it, like, might as well pay him. I'm getting it for free. So, but no, yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think the Federal Reserve as a whole has just kind of failed the country in that it has effectively facilitated a huge transfer of wealth yet again, in the way that I know
Hmm.
billionaires and their income is not directly tied to the stock of a company and all that,
Hmm.
but by backstopping huge corporations, kind of like Apple, they purchase Apple bonds. They're I think one of the largest purchasers of Apple bonds.
Hmm.
They kind of effectively inflate the stock price at little benefit to the American public. So they have this freedom to spend trillions of dollars purchasing bonds or issuing repo uh, transactions, I guess, whatever they're called, to effectively prop up share value. And I know that a lot of people have money in 401ks and everything, but when you have a central bank who intervenes only when the market is going down
Hmm.
or to make it go up, you kind of lose that free market principle that allows, natural corrections. And I think that we saw this leading to the uh, leading up to the crash in March, because we were hitting all-time highs,
Hmm.
but the Federal Reserve was still cutting interest rates. And so you can't call the market healthy if it can only reach all-time highs at 0% interest rates. It's
Sure.
absurd.
So, okay, so there's two things, okay? And when we start getting into the Fed, obviously, this starts getting into complicated areas that pass what I'm super informed on. So, the two things that I would be curious is one, my understanding is that the Federal Reserve has two jobs. One is to look at unemployment, and the other is to look at interest rates. And that when we look at unemployment and oh no, I'm sorry. It's unemployment and inflation.
Yep,
So
yep.
my understanding is that even though rates have been so low for so long, the reason why the Fed hasn't upped rates is because we just aren't seeing inflation, and it doesn't really make sense for the Federal Reserve to start upping their interest rates for no reason at the detriment to the rest of the economy when inflation seems to be under check. So
I
what would be
think
the motivation for them to do it? Yeah.
yeah. I think what it could be is that the traditional measurements of inflation are
Mm-hmm.
perhaps outdated. That could be like a controversial take. I don't know
I've heard
that I
this in regards
necessarily
to the
have.
idea that this inflation could be hiding in things like housing markets or whatever, but that's too
Yep,
complicated past me. But
exactly.
I've heard this argument before. Yeah, I just don't know how if it's true or not. But
Yeah, and that's what I've seen from people in the financial world is that, okay, you say that inflation is low, but if we look at kind of the costs of living and different ways, I guess, than necessarily the traditional models,
mm-hmm.
like it is more expensive to than is reflected in the inflation data.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there was a crash in 2018. I think it was in December. It was a small one, but I think that was because the Fed wanted to start increasing interest rates, and all of a sudden, that you see this massive sell-off, and then they kind of change course right away, and
Wait, when was
and so
this?
like kind of, I think it was December 2018,
Well,
I
okay, I wish
believe.
I could go back on it. I know every single time the Fed would talk about like we might raise interest rates, there'd be like a little bump in the market. But I feel like every time I followed those things would correct themselves like in a few days. That it was never like the Fed is like we're raising interest rates and it's like oh god we lost 5% off the fucking Nasdaq, Dow Jones, the S&P 500. It feels like those corrected like pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think December. I think the one I'm referring to was a little bit more significant than that. Is that, and they were starting to unwind some of the policies they had implemented after the 2008 crash, and I think
Mm-hmm.
interest rates might have been part of that. But then I think after the sell-off began, we had these calls from Mnuchin calling all these heads of banks saying, hey, liquidity's okay, don't sell, and I think the Fed ended up reversing course, and at least they did in terms of cutting interest rates again all through um, leading up through 2019. But yeah, I'd have to do a little bit more research to kind of um, give you that fully explained.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And then my second thing was I don't know. This just might be my ignorance. I don't know how many tools the Fed has to help like individuals. I feel like that's more
Yeah,
the purview of the job of the federal government. Like I like for me personally, I have no fucking idea
Certainly.
how like the overnight lending rate or the liquidity of like massive financial institutions guaranteed by the Fed ever helps me individually as a consumer.
Right,
But I do know
right.
that if the federal government increases the amount of unemployment available or the amount of stimulus or welfare in other ways, that helps. So it feels like criticizing the Federal Reserve for only helping the wealthiest and the corporations is a little bit misplaced, because it seems to me that that's really the only place where the Federal Reserve can help. This is monetary policy. Like the average American doesn't have enough in savings or enough diversified revenue streams or enough like access to capital to take advantage of big moves by the Federal Reserve, like they could take advantage of like federal government programs.
Sure. And to refine my criticism a little bit, I don't mean in that like, oh, hey, the Fed should have done more for the poor or the general person. And I think it's just that the way in which they enacted policies to correct or ease the market after the March crash was irresponsible in the way that it was handled, and ended up benefiting more the wealthy than it did the poor. Because I do think that their policies and the things that they have control of can benefit the poor and benefit the average worker. But I think the way that they implemented them in this particular case did not achieve that as well as it should have. But your point still stands, is that like they have no major way currently of offering programs to the average American, and so like we can't criticize them for that.
Gotcha. Yeah, I guess when I think of the Fed, like the only thing I really want the Fed to do is to, I guess, like through the mechanisms available to it, ensure that there's like liquidity in credit markets, and then to make sure that there's like stability in our largest corporations. And both of those things are probably most easily taken advantage of by people that have the most capital. So any behavior they engage in almost seems like it'll always benefit like the wealthiest people. And then if we want anything to filter down to normal people, that policy has to come from Congress, that we need some type of federal legislation or program or whatever to do it, seems to be.
Or tax policy, something like that. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's just sad. You just see all these protests and people struggling, and it just sucks.
Well, it seems like in government right now, you basically only have like unilateral action. Like if it's an organization or entity that can act on its own, that doesn't require like political capital to do things,
right,
that they can do things. So like the Supreme Court is very active. The Federal Reserve is very active. And this is my bullshit political analysis. It feels to me like the strength of these independent organizations can dramatically grow when the organizations that require political cooperation have become completely and totally gridlocked. So like the Supreme Court has grown so much in power because we're unable to pass laws through fucking Congress. So like we have to literally look to the Supreme Court for answers on legislation because we can't get any legislation from Congress. Or like the Federal Reserve becomes like the guiding force behind like so much of the American economy because we just can't get meaningful like reform or restructuring through Congress because the political will is just not there.
Yeah, no stimulus today because Trump doesn't feel like it. And
until after the election. I can't believe he tweeted that. That was such a stupid tweet.
Yeah, it's so stupid.
Not even stupid like it's mean or whatever, but just it seems like even politically dumb.
I know.
He basically said, none of you guys are getting money and it's my fault. Like, suck my dick. Like, it just seemed like so crazy to me, but I don't know.
Yeah. Explanation fails me other than like he's incompetent and stupid.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know what other explanation there is for that.
Well, yeah. Well, hey, listen, if there's ever anything that you feel like I get wrong or fuck up, or if there's anything you like super want to comment on that's like relevant, if you feel like I'm missing something or whatever, you can always shoot me an email and we can chat about it.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks a lot, man. Yeah, I appreciate the conversation. If any of my files ever come across your desk, let me know. Give me a heads up, okay? Although I don't think I'm in that range, so I'm just fucking with you. Okay. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate the conversation.
No, don't worry. I don't think you'd have... Yeah, you got it. Talk to you later.
Have a good one. Bye. Fucking competitive game that's ever been released on Twitch. Like, holy shit. Like, your avatar is a fucking Teletubby, and you're getting this mad.